The morning sun filtered through the tall pines surrounding my modest ranch cabin, catching dust motes floating through the kitchen. I sat on the cedar porch I had built with my own two hands, sipping coffee from a chipped mug my father had given me before he passed. Birdsong filled the quiet morning air. No traffic noise. No neighbors complaining about fence height or trash can placement. Just me, the mountains, and the gentle sounds of nature. This place represented everything I had worked toward for 15 years. Freedom, peace, independence. After spending my entire adult life in cramped apartments in the city working 60-hour weeks in a cubicle farm, I had finally escaped. The property was not fancy by any standard, just 20 acres with a modest two-bedroom cabin and a small barn out back. But it was mine, free and clear. Before purchasing, I had done extensive research. My previous apartment had been managed by a militant condo association that had made my life miserable with petty rules and surprise assessments. I specifically sought property outside any homeowners association jurisdiction. My real estate agent had confirmed it. The title search had confirmed it. The county records had confirmed it. This land existed beyond the reach of clipboard-wielding busybodies and their rule books. The first 3 months were blissful. I restored the weathered cedar siding on the south wall. I repaired the fencing for the small paddock behind the barn where I hoped to eventually keep a horse. I planted a vegetable garden and built raised beds for herbs. Each improvement felt like putting down roots, claiming this place as truly mine. Then came the letter. The envelope looked official with embossed lettering reading, Pine Lake Estates Homeowners Association. Inside was a notice claiming I had violated community standards with my unpermitted construction activities and unapproved exterior modifications. The letter demanded I cease all improvements and submit proper forms for approval, along with a $150 fine for noncompliance. I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen. It had to be a mistake. Pine Lake Estates was a gated community nearly 3 miles away, across the main road and on the other side of the actual Pine Lake. Their jurisdiction ended well before my property line. I tossed the letter into my recycling bin and continued with my day. 1 week later, I was installing rain gutters when a white police cruiser appeared at the end of my long gravel driveway. The vehicle moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator assessing unfamiliar territory. My stomach tightened instinctively as it approached. The officer who stepped out was young, maybe mid-20s, with an uncomfortable expression that suggested he would rather be elsewhere. "Good afternoon. Are you the property owner?" His voice was professional but tentative. "Yes, I am. Is there a problem?" I climbed down from my ladder, wiping my hands on my jeans. "We received a complaint about unpermitted construction activity from the Homeowners Association." He glanced down at his notepad. "They claim you have not filed proper documentation for your renovations." I felt my face flush with confusion. "Officer, there has been some mistake. This property is not part of any homeowners association. I specifically confirmed that before purchasing." The officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Well, sir, I am just responding to the call. The Pine Lake Estates HOA has filed a formal complaint. They say your property falls within their jurisdiction according to the original development plans." For 20 minutes, I explained my situation. I even retrieved my property documents to show him. He nodded politely but could only suggest I take it up with the HOA directly. As his cruiser disappeared around the bend in my driveway, a strange weight settled across my shoulders. This was no administrative error or misunderstanding. Someone wanted control over my private sanctuary, and they were willing to use authorities to get it. That night, I could not sleep. The encounter replayed in my mind as a chill of uncertainty crept through my once peaceful home. What I did not know then was that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would test every ounce of my resolve. The second police visit came exactly 2 weeks later. I was stacking firewood along the side of my garage when the now familiar white cruiser appeared. This time, a different officer approached, younger, with close-cropped hair and apologetic eyes. "Sir, we have received another complaint from Pine Lake Estates HOA about improper storage of materials visible from the road." He gestured toward my neatly arranged firewood pile. "According to their guidelines, firewood must be stored in approved containers or behind privacy screening." I took a deep breath to calm the anger rising in my chest. "Officer, as I explained to your colleague 2 weeks ago, this property is not part of Pine Lake Estates. It is not part of any homeowners association." The young officer nodded. "I understand, sir. I am just following protocol for the complaint. Maybe there is some confusion about property boundaries. I would suggest contacting the HOA directly to clear this up." After he left, I spread my property documents across my dining table. Warranty deed, title insurance policy, survey maps. All confirmed what I already knew. My deed showed no HOA covenants, restrictions, or easements. My property stood alone, legally unburdened by any community association rules. The following morning, I drafted a polite but firm certified letter to the Pine Lake Estates HOA board. I included copies of my property documentation and requested they cease sending authorities to my home for non-existent violations. I explained that my land had never been incorporated into their association and asked them to update their records accordingly. 1 week passed with no response. Then 2. On day 16, another official envelope arrived, not an acknowledgement of my letter, but a formal notice of accumulated fines now totaling $750 for continued noncompliance and failure to submit proper documentation. The letter warned that liens could be placed against my property if payment was not received within 30 days. My hands shook with disbelief as I read it. How could they possibly enforce fines against property they had no legal authority over? It defied logic and basic property law. 3 days later came the third police visit. This time, the complaint involved excessive noise disturbances, supposedly from power tools I had been using to build a chicken coop. The officer was clearly uncomfortable delivering this message, especially when I pointed out that my nearest neighbor was half a mile away, well out of earshot of any reasonable construction noise. Something inside me broke that day. My sanctuary no longer felt safe. That evening, I installed security cameras around my property perimeter, not to protect against trespassers, but to document the harassment I now faced regularly. Sleep became elusive as every set of headlights on the road triggered anxiety. Was it another police officer, an HOA representative, someone else coming to threaten the peace of my hard-earned home? Desperate for answers, I drove to visit my nearest neighbor, an older man named Frank who lived about half a mile down the road. We had exchanged casual waves but never really spoken. He greeted me with wariness when I knocked, but his expression shifted when I mentioned the HOA. "Those people have been trying to expand their territory for years," he confided, inviting me inside his modest farmhouse. "They want the prestige of controlling the lake properties. More houses under their control means more dues, more power. They have been particularly aggressive since Elaine Westmoreland became board president 2 years ago." Frank explained that several homeowners along our road had received similar letters and visits. Most had either capitulated and started paying dues or sold their properties under pressure. "They are banking on people not having the energy or resources to fight back," Frank said, pouring me a cup of coffee. It is cheaper to pay the dues than hire a lawyer, so most folks eventually give in. As I drove home that evening, the puzzle pieces began taking shape in my mind. This was a systematic attempt to absorb independent properties into their domain. Understanding the enemy brought clarity, but did nothing to stop the growing dread that my dream home might become uninhabitable under this relentless pressure. The fourth police visit occurred during a thunderstorm in early autumn. Rain pounded against the metal roof of my cabin as two officers stood dripping on my porch. Through the window, I could see them shifting uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed by their assignment. I opened the door with resignation, already knowing what was coming. "Good evening, sir. We are responding to a complaint about unauthorized livestock on residential property," the older officer said, rainwater dripping from his hat. "The HOA regulations apparently prohibit poultry within the subdivision." Behind me, as if on cue, my 3 hens clucked peacefully in their covered coop. I had built it specifically to protect them from the elements and predators, a sturdy structure with proper ventilation and insulation. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the absurdity of the situation. "Officers," I said calmly, "as everyone seems to know except the HOA board, this property is not part of Pine Lake Estates or any subdivision. I have documentation proving this fact. Would you like to see it again?" They declined politely. The younger officer spoke up. "Sir, we understand your frustration. We are just required to respond to the complaints. Have you considered reaching out to the county about this situation?" After they left, I sat in my darkened living room listening to the storm rage outside, a perfect mirror to the turmoil building within me. The harassment was clearly escalating. The property I had worked so hard to obtain was becoming a source of constant stress rather than the peaceful retreat I had envisioned. The following week brought another unwelcome visitor. I was checking my mail when a silver Mercedes sedan crept along my fence line. The driver moved slowly, stopping occasionally to take photographs of my property with an expensive-looking camera. When the vehicle paused near my driveway entrance, I approached with caution. The woman behind the wheel was in her early 60s, with perfectly styled gray hair and a stern expression that suggested she rarely heard the word no. She lowered her window just enough to speak, but not enough to indicate welcome. "You have numerous violations that need addressing immediately," she announced without introduction. "The board has been more than patient with your noncompliance." "Who are you, and why are you photographing my property?" I demanded, keeping my distance from her vehicle. "Elaine Westmoreland, president of Pine Lake Estates Homeowners Association." She spoke the title as if it granted her governmental authority. "Your continued violations cannot be tolerated. The integrity of our community standards must be maintained." "Ms. Westmoreland, you are currently trespassing on private property that is not part of your association," I stated firmly. "I have documentation proving this fact, which I have attempted to share with your board multiple times." Her smile was cold and practiced. "The original development plans from 1973 clearly show this parcel as part of Phase 3 of Pine Lake Estates. Your lack of cooperation is simply prolonging the inevitable." Before I could respond, she raised her window and drove away, tires crunching on the gravel road. Later, reviewing my security footage, I confirmed she had entered my property line to take photographs, clear evidence of trespassing that my cameras had captured perfectly. 3 days later came the fifth police visit, the one that would finally push me to action. This time, they brought paperwork, a formal notice threatening property seizure for unpaid HOA fines now exceeding $2,300. The document looked official with legal terminology and references to county statutes, but something about it felt wrong. Would a legitimate homeowners association have the authority to seize property without court proceedings? It seemed unlikely. As the officers prepared to leave, one lingered behind while his partner returned to the cruiser. He glanced toward the vehicle, then spoke in a low voice. "Look," he said quietly, "this happens more than you think. I have responded to at least 7 similar complaints against properties along this road in the past year. Get yourself a lawyer who specializes in property rights. This does not seem right to me." His unexpected advice cut through the fog of helplessness that had been clouding my judgment. He was right. I had been playing defense, reacting to each new intrusion rather than addressing the core issue. That night, surrounded by harassment documentation, property deeds, and security camera footage, something hardened inside me. These people had chosen the wrong target. I was not just defending a house. I was protecting my freedom and potentially the freedom of my neighbors who faced similar intimidation. I opened my laptop and began researching property rights attorneys in my county. As the screen illuminated my determined face in the darkness, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. This was war, and I was finally ready to fight back. The county records office became my second home. The staff grew accustomed to seeing me arrive each morning when they opened, armed with a thermos of coffee and a notebook. I pored over dusty property maps, boundary surveys, and historical development plans. The truth emerged slowly through the bureaucratic paper trail. My ranch sat a full mile outside the legitimate boundaries of Pine Lake Estates. Not just outside their jurisdiction, completely separate, with a state road and protected wetland area between us. On day 3 of my research, I discovered something crucial. The original 1973 development plans for Pine Lake Estates had indeed included a Phase 3 expansion that would have incorporated my area into their community. However, those plans had been formally abandoned in 1976 when the developer went bankrupt. The new developer who revived the project in 1980 had explicitly redefined the community boundaries to exclude our rural properties. This documentation was my smoking gun. Armed with these records, I scheduled a consultation with attorney Maria Ramirez, who specialized in fighting predatory community associations. Her office walls displayed framed newspaper articles about similar cases she had won. One headline caught my eye: "Attorney stops HOA land grab, saves family farm." "This is more common than people realize," Ms. Ramirez explained, examining my evidence folder. "Some boards become drunk on power, especially when there is financial incentive involved. What Pine Lake is doing is not just unethical, it appears to be clearly illegal." She agreed to take my case, suggesting we build a comprehensive record of harassment while preparing for potential litigation. "Document everything," she advised. "Every letter, every police visit, every interaction. We will need it all." That evening, I created a social media post describing my situation in careful, factual terms. By morning, 7 other homeowners had contacted me, all experiencing identical harassment from Pine Lake Estates. We arranged to meet at a local diner the following Sunday. The gathering was eye-opening. Each story followed the same pattern: intimidation, false claims of jurisdiction, police involvement, escalating fines, and eventually threats of property seizure. Some had been fighting for years, while others had only recently received their first notice. Together, we represented over 200 acres of independent rural properties that Pine Lake Estates apparently coveted. "They started targeting me after I refused to sell to a developer last year," explained a leaner, an elderly widow who had lived on her 5-acre property for 4 decades. Suddenly, I was getting weekly violation notices for my garden shed that has stood there since 1982. We pooled our resources for a series of public records requests, seeking every document related to Pine Lake Estate's governance and expansion plans. The revelation came buried in meeting minutes from 6 months earlier. Phase 3 Expansion Initiative, securing compliance from non-member properties through enforcement protocols. The document continued with chilling clarity. Target properties identified based on strategic location and estimated compliance probability. Initial enforcement actions to begin March 1st. My name appeared specifically, with a note describing my property as a strategic acquisition priority due to its lake access and development potential. They had planned this campaign deliberately, selecting targets they believed would fold under pressure. The document even outlined a budget for legal and municipal engagement, a euphemism for their systematic abuse of police resources and legal threats. With Ms. Ramirez guiding our strategy, we filed court paperwork against both the HOA corporation and each board member individually. The complaint alleged harassment, fraud, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We requested injunctive relief, compensatory damages, and punitive penalties. The local newspaper ran a small story about our lawsuit on page 3 of the county section. The headline read, "Rural homeowners fight back against alleged HOA overreach." That night, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from other victims coming forward, some from completely different parts of the county. What had begun as my personal fight was evolving into something much larger, a stand against institutional bullying that had apparently been happening unchecked for years. As I added another file folder to my growing evidence box, I felt something I had not experienced in months: hope. The HOA response came swiftly and aggressively. They hired Brenner and Associates, a prestigious law firm specializing in community association defense. Their motion to dismiss cited obscure boundary provisions from 1978 documentation and argued that the original developer's intent should supersede subsequent boundary revisions. "They are grasping at straws," Ms. Ramirez assured me during our strategy meeting. "But they have deep pockets and will try to exhaust us financially before we get to trial." The legal process moved forward at an agonizingly slow pace, but the harassment did not slow down. Instead, it intensified. Anonymous threatening notes appeared in my mailbox. "Drop the lawsuit or things will get worse." Vehicles slowly circled my property at night, headlights sweeping across my windows. My security system sent alerts to my phone at all hours as motion sensors detected people approaching my property line, then retreating. I installed additional cameras and upgraded to a more comprehensive security system. Every night, I checked all the doors and windows before attempting to sleep. The peaceful sanctuary I had worked so hard to create had become a fortress under siege. Yet something unexpected happened in parallel to the intimidation. Community support began to grow. Neighbors I had never met appeared at my door with food, offers of assistance, and their own HOA horror stories. A retired couple from 2 miles away brought hand-knitted blankets and stayed for tea, revealing how they had lost their previous home to similar tactics in another county. "We did not fight back then," the husband told me, voice thick with emotion. "We have regretted it every day since. What you are doing is important for all of us." Local businesses displayed small signs reading "Support Property Rights" in their windows. The county commissioner from our district called me personally to express concern about the situation. A local radio station interviewed Ms. Ramirez about the case without naming specific parties, bringing even more attention to the issue. 3 weeks before our scheduled court date, a settlement offer arrived via certified mail. Pine Lake Estates would forgive all accumulated fines if I voluntarily joined the association and paid 5 years of back dues totaling nearly $6,000. The letter emphasized that this generous offer would expire in 7 days. I laughed bitterly as I showed the document to Ms. Ramirez during our next meeting. "They still think this is about money," I said. "They do not understand that it is about freedom and principle." Through additional discovery filings, Ms. Ramirez uncovered a crucial piece of information. Elaine Westmoreland, the HOA president who had photographed my property, owned a property management company that held the exclusive contract for Pine Lake Estates. Her compensation increased with every property under association control, explaining her aggressive expansion strategy. She stood to gain thousands in additional monthly revenue if our properties were absorbed into the association. The morning of the court date arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I stood on my porch at dawn, watching the sunrise paint the pine trees gold. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I had already won a personal victory by refusing to be intimidated into submission. Ms. Ramirez met me on the courthouse steps, professional and confident in a navy blue suit. She squeezed my shoulder reassuringly as we passed through security. "Remember," she said quietly, "regardless of what happens today, you have already won by standing up to bullies. But I believe the law is firmly on our side." The courtroom doors swung open to reveal Elaine Westmoreland and 3 other board members sitting confidently with their legal team, 4 attorneys in expensive suits arranging documents on their table. They looked up as we entered, their expressions a mixture of contempt and surprise that we had actually appeared. Perhaps they had expected me to accept their settlement offer or simply give up from exhaustion. How wrong they had been. This was just the beginning. The courtroom felt unnaturally cold as proceedings began. Judge Elena Hernandez, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, reviewed documents with reading glasses perched low on her nose. She occasionally glanced up with narrowed eyes, her gaze moving between the 2 tables of attorneys. "Before we begin," Judge Hernandez announced, "I want to be clear that I have reviewed the filings from both parties, and I have serious concerns about several aspects of this case. Let us proceed with opening statements." The HOA attorney rose first, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch that caught the fluorescent light as he gestured. "Your Honor, this case represents a simple boundary dispute complicated by the plaintiff's refusal to acknowledge legally established community covenants. Pine Lake Estates has documented evidence that the property in question falls within the master plan community boundaries established in 1973. Ms. Ramirez countered with precision. "Your Honor, this is not a boundary dispute but a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation against multiple independent property owners. The defendants have no legal authority over these properties, as we will demonstrate through county records and legal documentation. Furthermore, we have evidence showing this is part of a deliberate strategy for financial gain." Our evidence unfolded methodically: property boundaries, harassment timeline, police reports, and security footage showing Elaine trespassing repeatedly. The judge leaned forward with increasing interest as we presented the HOA meeting minutes describing their Phase 3 expansion initiative and the list of target properties. The turning point came when Officer Jenkins, the policeman who had privately advised me to seek legal help, testified against department protocol. He described how the HOA had repeatedly insisted on police presence for minor complaints against multiple properties outside their jurisdiction. In 15 years of service, I never witnessed such persistent use of law enforcement for civil matters, he stated firmly. We responded to over 30 calls in a 6-month period regarding properties that appeared to be outside their legitimate boundaries. The HOA attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Hernandez overruled him each time, allowing the testimony to continue. When asked why he decided to testify, Officer Jenkins straightened his shoulders. "Because what they are doing is wrong," he said simply. "Residents are being harassed in their homes using police resources as the tool." The HOA legal team attempted to paint me as uncooperative and disruptive to community standards. They showed photos of my firewood pile, chicken coop, and ongoing renovations as evidence of violations, arguing that uniform standards benefited all property values in the area. Their case began collapsing when we presented the complete history of the development, including the 1976 bankruptcy and the 1980 revised plans that explicitly excluded our properties. The surveyor who testified confirmed that my property sat well outside any reasonable interpretation of Pine Lake Estate's boundaries. During cross-examination, Ms. Ramirez questioned Elaine Westmoreland about her property management company. Under pressure, Elaine inadvertently revealed that her company stood to gain over $75,000 annually in additional management fees from successfully incorporating our properties. "So you personally benefit financially from adding properties to the association?" Ms. Ramirez asked. "The company benefits," Elaine corrected stiffly, "as would the entire community through increased amenities and services." "And you receive what percentage of company profits as owner?" After a long pause, 80%. 4 other homeowners testified about identical harassment patterns, including Elena, the elderly widow who had faced weekly violation notices for her garden shed. Her emotional testimony about feeling unsafe in her home of 40 years visibly affected several people in the courtroom. Judge Hernandez removed her glasses midway through the third testimony, rubbing her temples. When all evidence had been presented, she sat silently for nearly a full minute, reviewing her notes. "This court has seen boundary disputes before," she announced, looking directly at the HOA representatives, "but rarely such coordinated efforts to intimidate private citizens. I am ordering a 2-hour recess before delivering my ruling." As the judge exited the courtroom, the HOA board members huddled with their attorneys, faces drawn with concern. Their confident demeanor from earlier had evaporated. My neighbors and supporters, who had filled the public seating area, offered encouraging smiles and thumbs-up gestures. Ms. Ramirez remained cautiously optimistic. "The judge seems to understand what is really happening here," she whispered. "Now we wait." Those 2 hours stretched like days as we paced the courthouse hallways. When we finally returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Judge Hernandez entered with a thick stack of notes and a resolved expression that gave nothing away about her decision. Judge Hernandez delivered her verdict with controlled fury. Her voice remained measured, but carried unmistakable indignation as she addressed the courtroom. "This court finds clear and convincing evidence of harassment, intimidation, abuse of process, and fraudulent misrepresentation by Pine Lake Estates Homeowners Association and its board members." She looked directly at Elaine Westmoreland. "The defendant's actions represent an egregious abuse of both homeowner association authority and public resources." The ruling awarded $175,000 in damages plus all legal fees, with individual board members held personally liable for punitive damages. Additionally, the HOA received a permanent injunction prohibiting any contact with properties outside their legally defined boundaries, which the judge ordered to be professionally surveyed and recorded with the county. The court is also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal charges related to fraud, harassment, and filing false reports, Judge Hernandez concluded. This case represents one of the most disturbing examples of corporate overreach and abuse of power this court has witnessed. Elaine Westmoreland's face drained of color. The other board members stared straight ahead, stunned by both the financial penalties and the potential for criminal charges. Their attorneys immediately began discussing appeal options, but their previously confident voices now sounded desperate. As we exited the courthouse, local media had gathered on the steps. What had begun as a small story in the county section had evolved into front-page news. Reporters called out questions about HOA overreach and property rights. Ms. Ramirez handled most inquiries professionally, emphasizing that the case established an important precedent for protecting independent homeowners from predatory associations. In the weeks that followed, the impact of our victory spread far beyond my personal situation. Homeowners from across the county reached out with similar stories, creating momentum for state legislative reform of HOA regulations. A state senator contacted me about testifying for a bill that would establish clearer boundaries and enforcement limitations for community associations. Within Pine Lake Estates itself, the ruling triggered an internal revolution. Association members, horrified by the revelations of their board's actions and facing increased dues to cover legal penalties, called an emergency meeting. The entire board was removed by overwhelming vote. Elaine Westmoreland resigned from her management company position amid investigations into other improper activities. The new board's first action was to issue a public apology to affected homeowners and establish clearer boundary documentation. Though the substantial settlement would have allowed me to purchase a larger home elsewhere, I remained in my beloved cabin. The property that had been a source of such stress now returned to being my sanctuary. I used part of the funds to establish a legal defense fund for homeowners facing similar battles, working with Ms. Ramirez to provide resources and support. The first snow of winter blanketed my property in peaceful white. No more unexpected police visits. No more threatening letters. No more vehicles slowly circling my home. The silence that greeted me each morning was once again comforting rather than anxiety-inducing. Neighbors stopped by regularly now, not out of concern but for coffee and conversation. What had begun as individual struggles transformed into a tight-knit rural community bound together by shared experience. The fence that once represented my vulnerability now symbolized hard-won boundaries. One evening, as I added another log to the fireplace, I reflected on how close I had come to losing everything, not because I lacked legal standing, but because I had almost lacked the courage to fight. The intimidation had nearly worked. How many others had given in simply because they felt alone against a powerful organization? Outside my window, the pines stood tall against the winter sky. They had weathered countless storms over decades, bending but never breaking. Like them, I had discovered my own resilience. Some battles choose you, and winning them requires not just evidence but the determination to protect what matters most: your home, your freedom, and sometimes the freedom of others facing the same fight. As the fire crackled, warming my small living room, I felt truly at home for the first time in many months. not just because I had won, but because I had refused to be driven from the place I belonged. Sometimes the most important victory is simply standing your ground.